The council chamber was a place of ancient power, its vast walls carved from a shimmering crystal that seemed to hold the light of distant stars within. The air was thick with a quiet hum, not of sound but of energy, a reminder that this was the heart of galactic governance. The leaders of countless species sat in solemn circles, their forms as varied as the worlds they hailed from. Some were tall and luminous, their bodies radiating soft glows like living lanterns. Others were shadowy figures, their features obscured by veils of mist. Together, they represented the wisdom and strength of the galaxy, bound by centuries of fragile peace. Elder Corrin stepped forward, his presence commanding yet serene. His tall, slender frame shimmered faintly with a teal hue, and his four eyes, too white and ancient, too narrow and sharp, seemed to pierce through time itself. His movements were slow, deliberate, and his voice, when it came, was low and resonant, carrying the weight of uncountable years. "I bring a warning to this council," he began, his tone steady but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. "A new species, the Terrans, has appeared among the stars. They are not like us. They are unpredictable." The chamber erupted into murmurs, a ripple of unease spreading through the gathered leaders. Some turned to one another, their voices hushed but tense. Others leaned back in their seats, their expressions skeptical. The idea of a new species disrupting the balance of the galaxy was met with both curiosity and doubt. At the highest seat in the chamber stood Grand Arbiter Lyra, her silver skin gleaming under the soft light of the crystals. Her presence was regal, her movements fluid, and her voice carried a calm authority that silenced the growing whispers. She looked down at Corrin, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Terrans," she said, her tone almost dismissive. Her lips curved into a faint smile, one of amused disbelief. "They are weak. They are young. They cannot threaten the balance of the galaxy." Corrin did not flinch under her gaze. His expression remained calm, but his voice grew firmer, each word carefully chosen. "They change too quickly," he said, his eyes scanning the room, meeting the gaze of every leader who dared to look back. "They adapt. If we do not watch them carefully, they will grow stronger than we can imagine." Lyra tilted her head slightly, her silver eyes narrowing as she studied him. There was a flicker of something in her expression, annoyance, perhaps, or doubt, but it passed quickly. She straightened, her voice cool and final. "We will not act on your fear, Elder Corrin. The council will not waste time on this." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The murmurs returned, softer this time, as the leaders began to shift their focus back to other matters. Corrin bowed his head, his movements slow and deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy, not with anger but with the weight of foreknowledge. "You will regret ignoring this warning." He stepped back into the shadows of the chamber, his teal glow fading as he retreated. The light of the crystals seemed dimmer now, as if even they felt the gravity of his words. The leaders turned away, their attention already moving on, but a faint tension lingered in the air, like the first whispers of a storm yet to come. And in the silence that followed, it was as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for what was to unfold. Far from the council's grand chamber, in the cold, endless expanse of deep space, the Vanguard glided silently through the void. Its sleek, metallic hull reflected the faint glow of distant stars, a lone ship venturing into the unknown. Inside, the hum of machinery was the only sound, a constant reminder of the fragile barrier between the crew and the vast emptiness outside. Captain Elias Thorne stood at the observation deck, his silhouette outlined by the soft glow of the stars. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of countless missions and the quiet determination of a man who had seen both the beauty and danger of the cosmos. "Anything out there, Dr. Arlen?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. Dr. Arlen, the ship's lead scientist, sat at her console, her fingers dancing over glowing panels. Her sharp eyes scanned the data, her brow furrowing as something caught her attention. "Wait," she murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "There's something. It's old. It's not natural." Thorn turned, his gaze sharpening. "What do you mean?" "It's not a planet or an asteroid," Arlen replied, her voice tinged with both excitement and caution. "It's artificial. Metallic. And it's been here for a very long time." The crew gathered as the Vanguard adjusted its course, drawing closer to the anomaly. As the ship approached, the object came into view, a massive, ancient beacon, floating silently in the void. Its surface was dark and weathered, covered in intricate alien symbols that glowed faintly, as if whispering secrets from another age. Thorn's breath caught as he gazed at the beacon. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Arlen's eyes remained fixed on the structure. "Something left behind, from another time," she said, her voice filled with awe. The crew worked quickly, scanning the beacon and recording its details. But as they probed deeper, the beacon began to change. The faint glow of its symbols grew brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost alive. "Captain," Arlen said, her voice rising with urgency. "Something's happening. It's activating." Before Thorn could respond, the beacon released a sudden burst of light, a brilliant pulse that shot out into the darkness, racing across the stars. The crew shielded their eyes, the ship trembling under the force of the energy. When the light faded, silence returned. But far away, in the depths of the galaxy, something ancient stirred. Something vast and powerful, long dormant, now awakened by the beacon's call. Unaware of what they had unleashed, the crew of the Vanguard stared at the beacon, its glow now steady and ominous. Thorn's voice broke the silence, calm but heavy with unease. "Dr. Arlen," he said quietly, "what have we just done?" Arlen didn't answer. She couldn't. The stars around them seemed colder now, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The chamber felt heavier than before, as if the air itself carried the weight of unspoken fears. The crystalline walls, once shimmering with a soft, comforting glow, now seemed colder, their light dimmed by the tension that hung over the council. The leaders of countless worlds sat in uneasy silence, their gazes shifting between Elder Corrin and Grand Arbiter Lyra. Elder Corrin stepped forward once more, his movements slow but deliberate, like a tide that could not be stopped. His teal aura pulsed faintly, casting soft shadows across the chamber floor. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but beneath it lay a deep undercurrent of urgency that sent a ripple through the room. "The Terrans," he began, his four eyes scanning the faces of the council, "have found the beacon. They have activated it. The galaxy stirs because of them." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending invisible waves through the gathered leaders. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions darkening with concern. Others remained still, their faces unreadable but their silence betraying a growing unease. Grand Arbiter Lyra rose from her seat, her silver form gleaming like liquid moonlight. Her expression was calm, but there was a sharpness in her eyes, a quiet defiance that cut through the tension. She shook her head slowly, her voice smooth but firm. "One beacon means nothing," she said, her tone dismissive, almost bored. "They stumble in the dark. They are children playing with fire, unaware of its dangers." Corrin's gaze did not waver. He stood taller, his presence filling the chamber like a storm on the horizon. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but it carried a weight that seemed to press down on every soul in the room. "But fire spreads, Grand Arbiter," he said, his words like a low rumble of thunder. And this beacon, it calls to something we buried long ago. Something we dared not destroy, for fear of what it might awaken. A shiver seemed to pass through the room, though no one moved or spoke. The silence was thick, oppressive, as if the very walls of the chamber were holding their breath. The leaders exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken by the elder's words. Lyra's silver eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The council will not act," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Let the Terrans play their games. They do not know what they have found, nor what it means. We have more important matters to attend to." Her words hung in the air, sharp and final, but the unease in the chamber did not lift. Corrin's gaze lingered on Lyra, his expression calm but unyielding. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect, but when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet warning. "Your pride blinds you, Grand Arbiter," he said softly, his words like a whisper carried on the wind. "The Terrans are not like us. They do not fear what they do not understand. They will push forward, and when they do, the fire will consume us all." With that, he stepped back into the shadows, his teal glow fading as he retreated. The council remained silent, their thoughts heavy with doubt and fear. Lyra sat down slowly, her expression unreadable, but the tension in her posture betrayed the uncertainty she would never voice. And though no one spoke, a sense of foreboding settled over the chamber, as if the galaxy itself had paused to listen, waiting for the storm that Corrin's words had promised. The Vanguard docked with a low, resonant hum, its sleek form dwarfed by the massive alien outpost it had approached. The station loomed like a great, ancient beast suspended in the void, its structure a chaotic weave of spires, glowing orbs, and twisting pathways that seemed to defy logic. Faint pulses of light rippled through its surface, casting eerie shadows that danced across the hull of the Terran ship. As the airlock hissed open, the Terran crew stepped cautiously into the alien world. The air was thick with an unfamiliar scent, sharp, metallic, and faintly sweet. Strange sounds echoed through the corridors, a mixture of distant hums, clicks, and the occasional low, guttural murmur. The walls of the outpost pulsed faintly, as though the station itself were alive, its heartbeat thrumming beneath their feet. Captain Thorn led the group, his posture steady but his eyes scanning every detail. Behind him, the rest of the crew moved in tense silence, their faces a mix of awe and unease. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. Beams of light crisscrossed the space, illuminating clusters of alien figures engaged in quiet conversations or focused on strange, glowing devices. At the center of the chamber stood Overseer Derek, his tall, lean frame cloaked in flowing black fabric that shimmered like liquid night. His skin was a deep, iridescent blue, and his sharp, angular features gave him an air of both elegance and danger. His eyes, narrow and piercing, seemed to see straight through the Terrans as they approached. "Terrans," he said, his voice smooth but tinged with a faint edge, like the hiss of a blade being drawn. "You are bold to come here?" Thorn stepped forward, his expression calm but his voice firm. "We come in peace," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "We seek knowledge." Derek's lips curled into a smirk, a flash of sharp, white teeth breaking the dark blue of his face. "Knowledge," he repeated, his tone laced with amusement. "Knowledge has a price. Be careful, Terran. The Council doesn't trust your kind." The words hung in the air like a warning, heavy and unspoken. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Thorn held Derek's gaze, refusing to flinch under the alien's scrutiny. As the conversation continued, the two groups moved to a quieter corner of the chamber, where the shadows seemed deeper and the hum of the station's activity faded to a distant murmur. There, in hushed voices, secrets were exchanged. Derek's sharp eyes gleamed with curiosity as he spoke of the galaxy's hidden truths, its ancient history, and the delicate balance of power that held it together. In return, Thorn and his crew shared fragments of humanity's story, its struggles, its resilience, and its relentless drive to explore and understand. In that quiet corner, the Terrans began to piece together the puzzle of the galaxy, each fragment of knowledge adding to their growing understanding. But with every answer came more questions, and with every revelation came the realization of just how vast and dangerous the galaxy truly was. Derek watched them closely, his smirk never quite fading. "You are ambitious," he said finally, his voice low. "But ambition is a double-edged blade. Wield it carefully, Terrans, or it will cut you down." Thorn nodded, his expression unreadable. "We'll take the risk," he said simply. As the Terrans returned to their ship, their minds were heavy with new knowledge, their hearts a mix of hope and unease. The outpost seemed to watch them as they left, its pulsing lights flickering like 1,000 unblinking eyes. And in the shadows, Overseer Derek stood alone, his sharp eyes fixed on the departing ship. A faint smile played on his lips, but his gaze was calculating, as though he were already weighing the consequences of what had just transpired. The Terrans had taken their first steps into the galaxy's depths, and the ripples of their presence were already beginning to spread. In the endless void of space, where silence reigned supreme and light was but a fleeting whisper, the beacon's call reached its destination. The signal, ancient and unrelenting, traveled through the cold darkness like a ghostly echo, touching something vast and terrible that had slumbered for eons. Deep within the shadows of a forgotten nebula, the hive ship stirred. It was no mere vessel, it was alive, a monstrous entity of unimaginable size. Its surface pulsed with a sickly, organic glow, a shifting tapestry of chitin and sinew that seemed to breathe. Countless eyes, scattered across its grotesque form like stars in a corrupted sky, blinked open one by one. They glowed a deep, menacing red, their gaze cold and unfeeling, as if the universe itself had birthed a predator too cruel to comprehend. The Ravager had awakened. It moved with a dreadful purpose, its massive tendrils stretching out like the arms of a god intent on destruction. Planets in its path were stripped bare, their surfaces left scarred and lifeless. Entire fleets vanished into its maw, their desperate resistance swallowed by the unrelenting hunger that drove it forward. It consumed everything: matter, energy, life itself, leaving only silence and ash in its wake. Far away, the Council's core worlds began to fill with refugees. They came in droves, their ships battered and overcrowded, their faces pale with terror. They spoke of annihilation, of a force that could not be stopped, of a darkness that devoured all. Their stories spread like wildfire, igniting fear and panic across the galaxy. In the council chamber, the air was thick with tension. The crystalline walls, which once radiated calm and wisdom, now seemed cold and unwelcoming. Elder Corrin stood at the center, his aura dimmed by the weight of his words. His voice, usually steady and measured, now carried an urgency that shook even the most stoic of the council members. "The Ravager has awakened," he said, his tone grave. "And we are not ready." The council fell silent. Even those who had once dismissed Corrin's warnings now looked to him with unease. The images brought by the refugees, the desolation, the destruction were fresh in their minds. Grand Arbiter Lyra sat at the head of the chamber, her silver form gleaming faintly in the dim light. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "We will stand strong," she said, her voice firm but lacking its usual certainty. "The Council has faced worse before. We have survived wars, invasions, and catastrophes. This will be no different." Corrin turned to her, his gaze piercing. He shook his head slowly, his expression a mix of frustration and sorrow. "You do not understand," he said, his voice low but heavy with meaning. "The Ravager is not like anything we have faced. It is not an enemy that can be reasoned with, nor a force that can be contained. It is hunger incarnate, a plague upon the stars. And the Terrans," he paused, his eyes narrowing. "They may be our only hope." The mention of the Terrans sent a ripple through the chamber. Whispers broke out among the council members, their voices filled with doubt and disbelief. Lyra's expression hardened, her calm mask slipping for just a moment. "The Terrans," she said, her tone sharp. "They are reckless, impulsive. They do not understand the balance of the galaxy. How can they possibly help us against something like this?" Corrin stepped closer, his voice rising, though it remained steady. "Because they are reckless," he said. "Because they do not follow the rules we cling to. They see possibilities where we see limitations. They are unbound by the fears that hold us back." Lyra stared at him, her silver eyes searching his face for answers. The chamber was silent once more, the weight of Corrin's words sinking into the minds of all present. Outside, the galaxy trembled. The Ravager moved steadily through the void, its countless eyes unblinking, its hunger unending. And though the council debated and doubted, the ancient predator drew ever closer, its shadow stretching across the stars. The darkness of space felt heavier than usual, as if the weight of impending doom pressed down on every star, every planet, every soul. The Ravager's shadow crept closer, swallowing entire systems in its insatiable hunger. The Council's strongholds, once proud and impenetrable, now seemed fragile against the tide of destruction. In her private chamber, Lyra stood alone, the faint glow of the Council's communication crystal casting pale light across her silver features. Her usually serene expression was marred by tension, her hands clasped tightly behind her back as she stared into the shimmering void before her. She had resisted this moment for as long as she could, but the truth was undeniable now, they could not face this threat alone. With a deep breath, she activated the crystal. Its light flared, forming a shimmering portal of energy, and moments later, the face of Captain Thorn appeared. His features were sharp, weathered by countless battles, his piercing eyes reflecting both curiosity and caution. Behind him, the faint hum of the Vanguard's bridge could be heard, though his focus was entirely on Lyra. "Terrans," Lyra began, her voice steady but laced with an undertone of reluctance. "The Council requests your assistance." Thorn raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Requests?" he said, his tone carrying a sharp edge. "Or demands?" Lyra faltered for a moment, her carefully composed mask cracking ever so slightly. She had expected resistance, but the weight of her own words felt heavier than she had anticipated. For centuries, the Council had viewed humanity as reckless, unpredictable, a dangerous force that upset the delicate balance of the galaxy. And now, here she was, asking for their help. She lowered her gaze briefly, her voice softening. "We need you," she admitted, the words almost a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Thorn studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Lyra feared he might refuse, that humanity would turn its back on the Council just as the Council had so often turned its back on them. But then, his smirk faded, replaced by a look of quiet determination. "We'll help," Thorn said finally, his voice firm. "But there's a price." Lyra's gaze snapped back to him, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. "What price?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Humanity gets a seat at the Council," Thorn said simply. His tone was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel in his words. No more being treated as outsiders. No more being dismissed. If we're going to risk our lives for this galaxy, then we deserve a voice in its future. Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. A seat at the council? It was unthinkable. The other members would never agree. Humanity was too volatile, too unpredictable. But as the image of the Ravager's destruction flashed in her mind, she knew there was no choice. Agreed, she said at last, the word heavy on her tongue. Thorn nodded, his expression betraying no satisfaction, only resolve. Then we have an alliance, he said. In that moment, something shifted. The alliance between humanity and the Council was not born of trust or friendship, but of necessity. It was fragile, uncertain, and fraught with tension. But it was also the galaxy's only hope. As the communication crystal dimmed, Lyra stood in silence, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She had taken a step that could change the course of history, but at what cost? Far away, aboard the Vanguard, Thorn turned to his crew. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with a fire that could not be extinguished. Prepare the ship, he said. We have a galaxy to save. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, the unlikely alliance began its march toward the darkness, toward the Ravager, toward a battle that would decide the fate of all. The council chamber felt heavier than ever, the air thick with tension and unspoken fears. The crystalline walls, which once shimmered with a serene glow, now seemed dim and cold, as though the light itself recoiled from the weight of the discussion to come. Around the circular table, the council members sat in uneasy silence, their expressions a mixture of doubt, fear, and reluctant hope. At the center of the room stood Captain Thorn, his figure sharp and commanding, a stark contrast to the refined elegance of the council. His dark uniform bore the scars of countless battles, and his piercing gaze swept across the room, unwavering. Behind him, his crews stood silently, their presence a quiet testament to the resolve of humanity. Thorn's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The Ravager is a hive mind, he began, his tone steady and unyielding. Its strength comes from its unity, a single consciousness controlling every tendril, every action, every attack. If we can disrupt that connection, even for a moment, the entire structure will collapse. The room remained silent for a beat, the weight of his words sinking in. Elder Corrin, seated to Lyra's left, leaned forward, his ancient face lined with both wisdom and weariness. He nodded slowly, his voice soft but filled with conviction. It is bold, he said, and it may be our only chance. But the other council members were less convinced. A murmur of discontent rippled through the chamber, their unease palpable. One elder, her crystalline form shimmering faintly, spoke up, her voice sharp with doubt. And what happens if it fails? What happens if the Ravager adapts, as it always has? This plan could doom us all. Lyra, who had remained silent until now, turned her gaze to Thorn. Her silver eyes reflected the faint light of the chamber, but her expression was unreadable. Your plan is reckless, she said finally, her voice calm but carrying an edge of skepticism. Thorn met her gaze without flinching. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, though his eyes remained serious. Reckless is what we do best, he replied, his tone laced with both confidence and defiance. The tension in the room deepened, the divide between the council and humanity laid bare. But Thorn did not waver. He stepped closer to the table, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. We don't have time for caution, he said, his voice rising slightly. Every moment we hesitate, the Ravager grows stronger. You've seen what it can do. Entire systems wiped out. Fleets devoured. If we wait, if we play it safe, There won't be anything left to save. The room fell silent once more, the gravity of his words pressing down on everyone present. Lyra's gaze lingered on Thorn, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of her people's expectations, the burden of centuries of tradition and caution. But she could also feel the shadow of the Ravager creeping ever closer, its hunger threatening to consume everything. At last, she sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "The Council will approve your plan," she said, her voice steady but tinged with reluctance. "But know this, Captain Thorn, if you fail, the consequences will be on your shoulders." Thorn nodded, his smirk returning briefly. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. Preparations began almost immediately. Across the galaxy, fleets were mobilized, weapons readied, and alliances solidified. The Council's forces, once scattered and divided, began to converge under a single banner. Humanity's ships, bristling with firepower and ingenuity, joined the fray, their presence a stark reminder of the desperate gamble they were about to undertake. In the quiet moments before the battle, Lyra stood alone in her chamber, staring out at the stars. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her, but deep down, she knew there was no other choice. Far away, aboard the Vanguard, Thorn and his crew prepared for what would undoubtedly be the fight of their lives. The plan was risky, perhaps even suicidal, but they had no intention of backing down. As the final pieces fell into place, the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the storm to come. And in the shadows, the Ravager stirred, its countless eyes watching, waiting, hungering. The air buzzed with urgency in the shipyard, a massive station orbiting a dying star. Its once bright light flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows across the Council's fleet. The ships, elegant, ancient, and powerful, floated like silent guardians, but they were not ready. They needed more time. Myra, a young Terran engineer, worked tirelessly among the chaos. Her hands, calloused from years of tinkering and building, moved with precision as she adjusted the delicate systems of a Council warship. Sweat dripped down her brow, her dark hair sticking to her face, but she didn't stop. Every second mattered. Around her, the station was alive with noise, shouts, the hum of machinery, the distant rumble of engines being tested. But Myra's focus was unshakable. She had been tasked with upgrading the Council's ships, integrating Terran technology into their ancient designs. It was a monumental challenge, but Myra had a gift. She could see solutions where others saw problems, and her determination burned brighter than a dying star outside. Suddenly, alarms blared. The station trembled as warning lights bathed the corridors in an eerie red glow. A voice crackled over the intercom, panicked and urgent. "The Ravager has found us. They are attacking. All personnel, evacuate immediately." Myra froze for only a moment, her heart pounding. Through the viewport, she could see the darkness creeping closer, a swarm of Ravager drones, their jagged forms like living shadows, descending upon the fleet. The station's defenses lit up, beams of light cutting through the void, but it wasn't enough. The Ravager was relentless. Engineers and crew members began to flee, abandoning their work to reach escape pods. But Myra didn't move. Her eyes darted to the ship before her, its systems still incomplete. Without the upgrades, it and the thousands of lives aboard wouldn't survive the attack. She clenched her fists, her breath catching in her throat. She knew what she had to do. Turning back to her tools, Myra worked faster than ever, her fingers flying across control panels and wires. The station shuddered violently as explosions echoed through its halls. She could feel the heat of the battle creeping closer, but she didn't stop. Her voice crackled over the comms, calm despite the chaos. "I need more time," she said, her tone firm. "If I can finish these upgrades, the fleet will have a chance." A voice responded, filled with desperation. "Myra, you have to evacuate. The station won't hold much longer." But Myra shook her head, even though no one could see her. "I'm not leaving," she said softly. "Tell Captain Thorne, tell him I'll see this through." The minutes stretched into an eternity as Myra worked. The station groaned around her, the walls buckling under the strain of the attack. She could feel the heat of fire creeping closer, the air growing thin as systems failed. But finally, with a triumphant cry, she completed the upgrades. The ship's engines roared to life, its systems glowing with new power. Myra stumbled back, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She could feel the station collapsing around her, but she smiled. The fleet would survive. As the ship launched, carrying thousands to safety, Myra closed her eyes. The heat and light of the explosion swallowed her, but she felt no fear. Only peace. The news of Myra's sacrifice spread quickly. In the council chamber, the atmosphere was heavy with grief. Even the most stoic members sat in silence, their gazes lowered. Lyra stood at the center of the room, her silver eyes shimmering with something unfamiliar. She replayed the words she had heard, the story of the young Terran who had given her life for a species she barely knew. "She gave her life, for us," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling. "A species she barely knew?" Elder Corrin, his ancient face lined with sorrow and pride, nodded slowly. "Now you see what they are capable of," he said, his voice steady. "Not destruction, but hope." Lyra's gaze dropped, her hands tightening into fists. For so long, the Council had viewed humanity as a threat, a force of chaos. But Myra's sacrifice had shattered that perception. She had shown them something they had forgotten: a willingness to fight, to sacrifice, to hope. The chamber fell silent, the weight of her actions settling over them all. And as the fleet prepared for the final battle, Myra's memory burned brightly in their hearts, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. The void of space was alive with fire and fury, a chaotic tapestry woven from the threads of conflict. The Allied fleet, a fragile coalition of ancient council ships and Terran vessels bristling with raw ingenuity, faced the endless swarm of the Ravager. These enemy ships moved like a shadowed storm, twisting and writhing as if they were alive, driven by a singular, terrifying will that propelled them forward with chilling precision. At the forefront of the Allied fleet stood Thorne, his voice steady and commanding as it echoed through the comms. "Stay unpredictable," he urged, his tone sharp yet calm, like a blade honed for this very moment. "The hive mind anticipates patterns. Be chaos. Let them chase ghosts." His words ignited a spark of determination among the crew, a flicker of hope amidst the overwhelming darkness. With a collective breath, the Allied ships surged forward, breaking formation in a seemingly erratic dance. Terran fighters darted in and out of the fray, their movements wild and uncalculated, embodying the very essence of unpredictability. Council warships unleashed powerful beams of energy, cutting through the Ravager's ranks with blinding brilliance. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers across the battlefield, their light illuminating the vast, star-studded darkness of space, a stark contrast to the encroaching shadows. But for every enemy ship destroyed, more seemed to take its place, an unrelenting tide of hunger and destruction that threatened to swallow them whole. The presence of the Ravager was suffocating, a dark cloud of despair that loomed over the battlefield. Thorne gritted his teeth, his hands gripping the controls tightly, knuckles white with tension. He could feel the weight of every life aboard the fleet pressing down on him, a heavy mantle of responsibility, but he refused to falter. They were fighting not just for survival, but for hope itself. Far from the chaos of the front line, Dr. Arlen and her team navigated the cold, lifeless corridors of the Ravager's core. The air was thick with an unnatural hum, a low vibration that seemed to resonate deep within their bones, sending shivers of dread through them. The walls pulsed faintly, as though the ship itself were alive, breathing, watching their every move. "Keep moving," Arlen whispered, her voice barely audible over the oppressive hum. Her team nodded, their faces pale but resolute. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the hive mind, where they would plant the device, a creation born of desperation and brilliance, designed to sever the Ravager's connection to its fleet and bring an end to the nightmare. As they reached the core, the hum grew louder, almost deafening, vibrating through the very air around them. The room was massive, its walls lined with strange, organic tendrils that pulsed with an eerie light, casting ghostly shadows that danced across the floor. At the center was the core itself, a pulsating sphere of dark energy, its surface shifting like liquid shadow, a swirling mass of malevolence. Arlen's hands trembled as she activated the device, her breath shallow and quickening. "This will work," she murmured, a mantra of hope and desperation, as much for herself as for her team. "It has to." The device began to glow, its light spreading through the core like cracks in glass, illuminating the darkness with a fierce brilliance. Suddenly, the hum transformed into a piercing shriek, a sound that clawed at their sanity. The tendrils writhed violently, as though in pain, thrashing against the walls of the chamber. Arlen felt a surge of fear but pressed on, knowing they had no choice. With a final burst of energy, the team barely made it out before the core began to collapse, its energy imploding in on itself, a cataclysmic reaction that sent shockwaves through the ship. Back on the battlefield, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The Ravager's ships faltered, their movements becoming erratic and disjointed, as if the hive mind had suddenly lost its grip. Thorn seized the moment, his heart racing with a mixture of fury and hope. "Now," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos, rallying his comrades. The Allied fleet surged forward, their weapons tearing through the confused enemy with newfound ferocity. One by one, the Ravager's ships fell, their dark forms crumbling into nothingness, consumed by the very void they had once commanded. The hive mind was broken, its connection shattered like glass, leaving the enemy in disarray. As the last of the enemy ships disintegrated, a hush fell over the battlefield, an eerie silence that contrasted sharply with the cacophony of destruction that had just unfolded. The Allied fleet, battered and bloodied, floated amidst the debris-filled void, surrounded by the remnants of their fierce struggle. They had won, but the cost was staggering, each ship a testament to the sacrifices made in the name of survival. In that moment, they understood the true weight of victory, a bittersweet reminder of the lives lost and the battles yet to come. The council chamber lay in profound silence, an almost sacred stillness enveloping the space. The air was heavy with grief and reverence, each breath taken with a sense of solemnity. The crystalline walls shimmered faintly, their surfaces reflecting the somber faces of those gathered, each expression a tapestry of loss and resilience. Around the central platform, the honored dead were laid to rest, their names etched into glowing panels that floated gently, a poignant tribute to their sacrifice. Each name pulsed softly, a heartbeat echoing the lives that had been lost, reminding all present of the cost of their victory. Lyra stood at the center, her silver eyes dulled by sorrow but burning with an unyielding resolve. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the enormity of their loss mingling with the hope for a brighter future. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself, her voice steady yet heavy with emotion as it resonated through the chamber like a solemn melody. "The Terrans have shown us a new path," she began, each word carefully chosen, imbued with the weight of truth. "One of unity, of strength through diversity. They have taught us that hope can be found even in the darkest of times. Today, we welcome them as equals." Her words hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting the past to the future. For a moment, there was only silence, a shared breath of understanding and grief. Then, one by one, the council members rose, their gestures of respect echoing across the chamber like a gentle wave. The alliance, born of desperation and forged in the fires of conflict, had transformed into something far greater, a bond that transcended species, a commitment to stand together in the face of uncertainty. Outside, beneath a vast expanse of stars, Thorn stood beside Corin, the two figures silhouetted against the infinite backdrop of the cosmos. The stars twinkled like distant memories, each one a reminder of the battles fought and the lives lost. Thorn gazed out at the endless void, his heart swelling with a quiet determination. "This is just the beginning," he said softly, the weight of his words hanging in the cool night air. Corin nodded, his ancient eyes reflecting the light of the stars, a deep well of wisdom and experience. "The galaxy is vast, Captain," he replied, his voice rich with the echoes of ages past. "And full of mysteries." There was a gravity to his words, a reminder that their journey was far from over, that the challenges ahead would require courage and unity. Thorn allowed himself a small smile, a flicker of hope igniting within him. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the darkness met the light, a metaphor for their own struggles. The battle was over, but the journey ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. Together, they had forged a fragile peace, a glimmer of hope in a galaxy scarred by war. As they stood beneath the infinite sky, the stars above seemed to twinkle in agreement, a silent promise of possibilities yet to come. They knew that the future, uncertain and vast, was theirs to shape. With each breath, they embraced the unknown, ready to face whatever lay ahead, united in purpose and spirit. The galaxy had undergone a profound transformation. The remnants of war lingered like haunting specters, their presence a silent testament to the fierce battles once fought in the endless void. Fragments of twisted metal and shattered ships drifted aimlessly, each piece a ghostly reminder of lives lost and the relentless struggles that had unfolded in the darkness. Yet, amidst this desolation, something fragile yet undeniably powerful began to take root: hope. Once perceived as outsiders, the Terrans now walked among the council as equals, their presence breathing new life into the ancient assembly. The halls, once steeped in solemnity, now pulsed with vibrant energy. Laughter and animated discussions filled the air, as voices from every corner of the galaxy intertwined like threads in a rich tapestry. This symphony of languages celebrated their shared journey, each word a note in a melody of unity and renewal. The air was thick with anticipation, ideas flowing freely, sparking innovation and resilience long absent from these corridors. Beyond the council chambers, out in the starfields, the work of rebuilding had begun. Ships from countless species labored side by side, their hulls gleaming under the warm light of distant suns. Massive stations rose from the ashes of war, their structures standing tall as symbols of unity and collaboration. The atmosphere buzzed with the hum of engines and the chatter of crews, their determination and laughter weaving a melody of renewal that filled the void with a sense of purpose and hope. Thorn stood amidst the bustling activity, his presence a calm anchor in the sea of movement. His voice, though soft, carried across the stars, a quiet reflection that resonated with those around him. "We are not alone anymore," he said, his tone steady yet filled with wonder. Each word felt like a promise, echoing the truth that had blossomed from the ashes of conflict. "And together, we are stronger than we ever imagined." Nearby, a Terran ship hovered alongside a council vessel, its crew exchanging waves and smiles through the viewports. This once impossible sight had become a reality, a vivid symbol of what they had achieved together. The barriers that had once separated them were crumbling, replaced by bonds forged in the fires of adversity and shared triumphs. Yet, even as the galaxy began to heal, an undercurrent of uncertainty lingered. The vastness of space stretched endlessly before them, its mysteries concealed in the depths of darkness. Questions loomed like shadows: what lay beyond their fragile alliance? What challenges awaited in the uncharted corners of the universe? But for now, they chose to believe. They chose to trust in the strength they had found in one another, a strength that had emerged from shared struggles and victories. The flicker of hope burned brightly within them, illuminating the path ahead, guiding their steps as they ventured into the unknown. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in purpose and spirit, ready to embrace the adventures that awaited in the vast, mysterious expanse of the galaxy. The stars shimmered, ancient and unyielding, their light spilling across the void like whispers of forgotten tales. Each one seemed to hold a secret, a fragment of time long past, yet still burning with quiet defiance against the endless black. Thorn and Corin stood together on the observation deck, their figures motionless, silhouetted against the vast cosmos that stretched infinitely before them. The silence between them was not empty, it was alive, humming with unspoken thoughts, with the weight of what had been and the promise of what was to come. Ahead of them, two ships moved in perfect harmony, their paths crossing the void with a grace that seemed almost deliberate. The Terran vessel, sharp-edged and daring, bore the unmistakable mark of human ingenuity, bold, restless, and eager to carve its place among the stars. Its hull gleamed faintly, reflecting the distant starlight like a blade poised for adventure. Beside it, the council ship glided with an ancient elegance, its curves smooth and deliberate, as though shaped by centuries of wisdom. Together, they were a contrast of youth and age, of ambition and patience, yet their movements spoke of unity, a shared purpose that transcended their differences. The engines of the ships pulsed softly, their glow faint but steady, like embers in a dying fire. They moved as one, their paths intertwining as they ventured deeper into the unknown, leaving trails of light that lingered briefly before fading into the darkness. There was something poetic in their journey, something that hinted at the fragile beauty of what had been forged, a fragile alliance, now bound by trust and hope. Corin's voice broke the stillness, low and measured, carrying the weight of centuries spent gazing into the unknowable depths of space. "The stars hold many secrets, Captain," he said, his tone reverent, as though speaking to the stars themselves. His eyes, ancient and wise, reflected the faint glimmers of light from distant suns. "But now, we face them together." There was a gravity to his words, a sense of inevitability and purpose. The stars, vast and all-encompassing, had always been a mystery, a challenge, a dream. And now, for the first time, they would face them not as individuals, not as fragmented worlds, but as a united force. Thorn turned to him, his expression thoughtful, his jaw set with quiet determination. The lines of his face, hardened by battles won and lost, softened for a moment as he replied. "Together," he said simply, the word carrying with it the weight of every sacrifice, every victory, and every promise they had made to one another. It was more than an agreement, it was a vow, a declaration that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it side by side. They stood in silence once more, their gazes fixed on the two ships as they disappeared into the vast expanse. Slowly, the forms of the vessels were swallowed by the darkness, their faint glows fading until only the stars remained. Thorn felt a pang of something unnameable, a mix of pride, longing, and an ache for the unknown. He could feel the pull of the future, of adventures yet to come, but also the weight of the past, of the lives lost to bring them to this moment. The view shifted, expanding outward, revealing the galaxy in all its breathtaking splendor. Nebulas swirled like living paintings, vast clouds of color and light that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Shades of violet, gold, and azure bled into one another, creating a cosmic masterpiece that defied comprehension. Stars burned fiercely, their light piercing the darkness, each one a beacon of hope, a reminder of the resilience of life. Amidst the brilliance, tiny points of light moved steadily, ships, scattered across the galaxy, each carrying its own story, its own purpose. They were sparks of life in the vast, unending night, fragile yet determined, carving paths through the unknown. The galaxy stretched on endlessly, a tapestry of wonder and potential, each star a promise waiting to be fulfilled. And in that infinite expanse, Thorn and Corn stood still, their hearts heavy with the weight of the moment, yet lightened by the possibilities ahead. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was filled with a quiet understanding, a shared resolve. As the light of the stars grew softer, fading into the blackness, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The faint glow of distant suns lingered, a quiet reminder that even in the darkest corners of the cosmos, light endured. In that boundless void, a new dawn began, silent, mysterious, and full of promise. The stars, ancient and watchful, waited patiently for the next chapter, as Thorn and Corn prepared to step forward into the unknown, together.